I speak to you as one who has watched storms form not in the sky, but in the hearts of men. Persecution never arrives suddenly. It begins quietly, almost unnoticed, growing from fear, from misunderstanding, from a truth that troubles those who do not wish to see it. At first, there is only discomfort, then suspicion, and finally, resistance turns into force. So it was when the first wave arose. Faith did not change, but the world's patience with it did. What was once tolerated became dangerous. What was once ignored became watched. Believers felt the shift before chains ever appeared. Conversations grew cautious, doors closed more carefully, hearts learned to listen for danger even in ordinary moments. I have learned that God allows such moments not by accident, but by purpose. This first wave was not merely cruelty. It was a testing of fidelity. Would faith remain when it no longer brought peace, but risk? Would love for God endure when safety began to disappear? Many were confused, some were afraid. Yet in this quiet rising of the storm, souls were being shaped. God was separating comfort from conviction. Those who remained did not do so because they were strong, but because they trusted. Understand this: persecution is not the failure of faith. It is the moment faith becomes real. When the storm first rose, God was already present, preparing his faithful to stand, quietly, firmly, and without fear. There comes a moment when quiet suspicion gives way to open accusation. The truth, once merely unwelcome, is suddenly named an enemy. Authorities speak with firm voices, declaring that faith itself is dangerous, not because it harms, but because it refuses to bow. I have seen how truth unsettles those who seek control, how light troubles the eyes that prefer darkness. For the faithful, this moment cuts deeply. What was once lived peacefully must now be chosen deliberately. Obedience to God is no longer hidden within ordinary life. It stands exposed, asking for a decision that may cost safety, comfort, and approval. I have learned that when obedience is easy, it teaches little. When it is costly, it reveals the heart. Some felt the pull of fear. Others felt the ache of being misunderstood. To be named an enemy for loving God wounds the soul, yet it also clarifies it. The faithful learned that they could not serve both peace of the world and truth of Christ. One must be released so the other may be held. I myself learned obedience through small sacrifices, unnoticed by many, yet heavy within. These believers faced greater trials, yet the lesson was the same. God asks not for loud defiance, but for quiet fidelity. When faith was declared an enemy, love was tested. Those who remained did so not in anger, but in surrender. They chose God over safety, trust over approval, and obedience over ease. In that choice, their witness began to shine. Then, the suffering no longer lived only in words. It took form. Hands were seized, homes were entered, names were called aloud in public places. The first arrests came suddenly, and with them a fear that settled deep within the heart. Families were torn apart without warning. Familiar faces disappeared overnight. Life, once ordinary, collapsed into confusion and grief. I have learned that when God allows everything familiar to fall away, the soul is forced to cling to Him alone. In this first wave of suffering, many felt disoriented and afraid. Some could not understand why faith now led to chains. Others struggled with the shock of loss, of seeing loved ones punished for nothing more than belief. Public punishments followed. Bodies were displayed so that fear might spread more quickly than faith. Executions were carried out not only to destroy lives, but to break courage. Yet, something unexpected occurred. Instead of extinguishing belief, suffering purified it. Fear revealed who trusted God not for comfort, but for truth. I have seen how God strengthens the soul quietly in moments of collapse. He does not remove pain at once, He enters it. In tears, He is present. In confusion, He remains near. This first wave was cruel, yet it was also a revelation. It showed that faith rooted in love does not vanish when tested. It grows deeper. When everything familiar was stripped away, God remained. And that was enough for those who chose to endure. After the blow had fallen, a deep silence followed. It was heavier than shouting, heavier than chains. Fear no longer needed to announce itself. It lived quietly in every home and every heart. People learned to speak less, to look carefully, to listen more than they talked. Faith did not disappear, but it withdrew into hidden places where only the faithful knew how to find it. I have learned that violence is loud, but what follows is silence. And in that silence, the soul is tested even more deeply. Whispers replaced prayers spoken aloud. A gesture replaced a word. A glance carried meaning that could not be spoken. Hearts became guarded, not because love weakened, but because love had to survive. This was the time when faith lived only in careful acts. A pause before sleep, a quiet bow of the head, a tear shed alone. God was present in these small things, closer than ever, listening where voices could not rise. If you want this hidden truth of faith to reach more souls, hit like so it can travel where words once could not. I stood many years in silence at my door, learning that God works most deeply when no one is watching. So it was here. The world thought faith had been crushed, but it was only hidden. In guarded hearts and quiet devotion, belief endured, waiting patiently, alive beneath the silence that followed the blow. The storm returned, fiercer than before. The first wave had passed, leaving scars and quiet hearts, but now persecution rose once more. Families who had survived fear before found themselves tested again. Arrests returned, punishments were harsher, and the world's scrutiny pressed more heavily on every action, every word, every glance. I have learned that God does not allow suffering to return to destroy, but to strengthen. When trials repeat, the soul is given the chance to grow deeper roots. Faith that endures once may waver in comfort, but faith that survives repeated trials becomes steadfast, like a tree buffeted by wind, yet standing tall because its roots reach farther into the earth. Believers learned patience anew. They practiced quiet obedience, trusting even when the threat seemed endless. Love for God was tested not only by the first danger, but by the endurance of the second. And in that endurance, courage was born. I reflect on how repeated trials refine the heart. It is not in the absence of difficulty that fidelity is proven, but in continuing to walk the path of obedience when fear has returned. The second wave swept over them, yet faith remained. God's hand was quiet but firm, guiding each step, sustaining each heart, showing that love endured even when suffering returned, deeper and more demanding than before. As the second wave settled, the world made its cruelty more deliberate. Executions were no longer hidden. They became public spectacles, meant to terrify, to shame, to show that obedience to God came at the highest cost. Yet in this cruelty, I have learned, the faithful discovered a new kind of courage. Martyrdom is not a boastful path. It is not pride that carries a soul to the scaffold, but humility, a quiet surrender to God's will. The martyrs walked, knowing that fear could touch the body, but not the spirit. They embraced suffering as a calling, offering their pain as prayer, their weakness as witness. I have spent my life in small, unnoticed tasks, learning that holiness often lives in quiet service. So too did these martyrs show the world the strength of faith not through violence or protest, but through calm, steadfast courage. A bowed head, a gentle step, a whispered prayer. These became louder than any cry of fear or anger. The path of martyrdom teaches that true witness is not in what is shouted, but in what is endured. The faithful faced death with hearts open to God. And in that openness, they bore a light stronger than fear, a testimony that reaches beyond time, proving that the soul united to God is never truly defeated. The third wave arrived with precision and cruelty. Authorities sought not only to punish, but to erase. Faith itself became the enemy to be hunted, rooted out, and destroyed. Homes were searched, families were separated. Every act of devotion, every quiet prayer, every hidden symbol was a target. I have seen that such systematic cruelty wounds the soul deeply, yet God's presence is never withdrawn. Believers learn to carry fear silently, to shield faith within gestures, memories, and hearts. Parents taught children without words, guiding them through signs only the family could understand. Every day became a delicate balance between survival and fidelity. I have spent years guarding doors, performing humble tasks unnoticed, learning that God protects those who trust Him even when the world seems relentless. Even as suffering multiplied, the faithful discovered hidden strength. God does not abandon His people, even when faith appears hunted. He walks with them in secret, offering courage when human aid is gone, comforting hearts when despair presses close. The third wave revealed the depth of devotion. Faith that might have been shallow in comfort became strong in trial. Families endured, hearts intertwined in love and prayer, proving that even when persecution seeks to erase belief, God's grace preserves it. The hunted souls learned that faith cannot be destroyed. It can only be refined and hidden until the time is right for it to shine again. When the world hunted faith openly, the faithful learned to live in shadow. Churches remained empty. Public prayer was forbidden. Yet belief did not vanish. Families hid their devotion in quiet corners, in gestures known only to God, in traditions passed softly from hand to hand. I have spent my life serving quietly at a door, learning that the smallest acts, done with love and obedience, carry great weight in God's eyes. These hidden believers adapted to survive. Meals became prayers. Household chores became offerings. Stories were whispered instead of read aloud. Each act was small, unseen, yet sacred. God's truth endured not through grandeur or display, but through careful, persistent devotion. Faith driven underground is tested daily. Fear presses near, yet trust grows quietly in response. The heart learns patience, vigilance, and humility. I have learned that what is hidden is often most precious. In small, unseen acts, God works mightily, shaping souls and preserving belief. If you want to hear how God guided them in silence, type "yes" in the comments below. Through this hidden life, the faithful survived not by strength alone, but by the quiet courage of ordinary acts. Even in secrecy, faith remained vibrant. God's presence was felt in whispers, gestures, and gentle obedience, proving that truth, though hidden, cannot be extinguished. The final wave descended with unrelenting force. Exhaustion weighed upon every soul. Despair whispered in quiet corners, and hope seemed distant, almost unreachable. Faithful hearts were tested as never before, asked to love God without any promise of relief, without visible comfort, without certainty of tomorrow. I have learned that when suffering seems endless, perseverance is not born of courage alone, but of surrender. To love God in these moments is to offer the heart fully, knowing it may not be returned in worldly ways. The faithful carried prayer in silence, patience in their footsteps, and trust in each heartbeat. Families and communities were drained, yet they endured. Each act of devotion, no matter how small, became a monument to steadfastness. Children learned resilience through the quiet example of their parents. Parents learned endurance by walking each day with courage that often went unseen. This final trial revealed the depth of love that can exist when earthly aid is gone. God's presence is closest in the hours of greatest despair, whispering strength into hearts that cannot lean on human comfort. Though the fourth wave sought to overwhelm them, faith endured. Souls purified by suffering and strengthened by quiet fidelity proved that love for God requires no reward, no recognition, and no certainty, only trust. In this final trial, perseverance became the most sacred testimony of all. At last, the storms of cruelty and fear subsided. The faithful, though worn and scarred, still stood. Generations had suffered, families had been torn apart, bodies had been broken, yet belief remained unshaken. I have learned that persecution, no matter how fierce, cannot destroy what God has planted in the heart. It may refine, it may purify, but it cannot extinguish. Faith endured in hidden gestures, whispered prayers, and quiet acts of obedience. What had been forced into shadow emerged stronger, tested and proven by time, suffering, and steadfast love. Those who had endured without hope now witnessed the victory of devotion over fear. They understood that suffering was not wasted. It shaped hearts to trust without certainty, to love without reward, and to witness without applause. God had walked with them in every trial, unseen yet ever present, sustaining each soul with quiet strength. And so the church discovered not defeat, but a faith refined and made resilient by decades of patient perseverance. If this moved your heart, comment "Pray" below. Let us remember, persecution does not end faith. It does not silence devotion. It only teaches the soul that love for God is stronger than any threat, braver than any fear, and eternal beyond the trials of this world. In hidden courage and enduring trust, faith triumphs forever unbroken.